Our exploration comes to an inevitable next step. We reach a time of many new games, much experimentation, and plenty of new music. 'Tis the time of the rise of indie gaming.
Ooh, a minute.
I like the drama.
So let's talk about that. Welcome to the Music Arcade. Hello everyone, I'm a very exhausted Galen the SoundGuy Firestone.
I am your independently developed Ranakel.
And I'm a very pixelated Edie.
And welcome to this very interesting episode of Music Arcade.
Very interesting indeed.
So, how did we get here?
Well, we got here because we wanted to do a Supergiant Games episode. And then, turns out they have 4 games, and one of them has been talked about extensively, with the other more peppered in. And so, I was like, where do we steer that? And it ended up being a time period around the first game being Bastion that was taken a bit randomly, but the more I looked at my choice, which was basically indie games from 2007 to 2012, the more that period was an interesting intersection of factors that definitely explained why a fair amount of game that echo to these days have come out, because we had the PS3 that was by all accounts being a pain in the tush to develop for.
Yeah, I could tell that from the kind of games we ended up getting on that system.
Yeah, we had Steam that finally got good and bribed people to come on board the platform with the orange box. Mm-hmm. We had Xbox Live Arcade that bankrolled a fair amount of games and justified making smaller projects and making them economically viable. And
correct,
we had the fact that some of the later factors, like in particular kickstarted projects, Double Fine Adventures at the head, didn't happen yet, which meant the landscape hasn't changed to that kind of production yet. And so what we had is something that kind of seemed interesting at the time, but didn't think as pivotal as I think it ended up being. Like, it felt like a natural little set of side projects that were interesting and not the rise of an entire alternative force to gaming as it is today. And so it's interesting to delve into it and what it meant at the time, including through the lens of music, because this is a Music Arcade podcast after all.
I think just to add another little point there, I think another aspect that makes these early indie titles very interesting is that I think around the late 2000s was when we started seeing signs that Adobe Flash wouldn't be around forever. That's more or less
Flash
where
as a
this
dev tool was definitely a factor to help easier productions.
Yeah, we had like it's sort of an in between, because Flash was definitely still around. It was definitely still big, but at the same time, we were starting to see the signs that it was so unsafe that it would probably not be around forever. So a lot of those indie developers started getting big at the time. In fact, one of the devs we'll be talking about later, one of the studios, they started doing Flash games, and then they got big with their PlayStation exclusive title.
Yeah. The games that I have played on here, I pretty much all played on like Congregate or Arbor games around this time.
Yeah, exactly. It was a viable dev tool at the time, and it's part of what made it so interesting. It's not that it was powerful or optimized, God no, but it's that it was an easy onboarding process.
It was very approachable and very versatile, I'd say.
Oh, absolutely. The amount of just random Flash games I played back in those days
Same.
that I would play for a day or two, complete, get my achievements on, and move on, felt like it mattered.
Yeah,
Felt like
and
it...
that informs immediately the kind of duration these games can get, which started contrasting already with the growing trend of sequels and DLC content that was added on and on, to the point where you started that trend of buying a game not being the end point, which is unfortunately an accepted standard today, including for indie.
Yeah. The house that Horse Armor has built, huh?
Indeed. Like, I specifically remember I didn't pre-order a lot of games by kind of principle, but one of the exceptions I made was Transistor, because of Supergiant Games' insistence with Bastion of making a game, releasing a game, done.
On the one hand, I do appreciate that. On the other hand, DLC has become a very, very good way of delivering additional content, delivering expansion packs.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember with Samurai Warriors 2 in particular, I had to buy a whole second disc, put it in my PlayStation 2. It would read to see if I had the first disc. Like, it wouldn't check save file. I had to actually, like, swap discs mid-game to be like, oh yeah, it's totally here, and then go back to Samurai Warriors 2, and it wouldn't save that I did that too. I'd make me recheck a lot.
Oh, yeah.
That's no longer a problem. If I want to play Extreme Legends, I could just buy it, download it, and get it. A lot of time for free as well. Like, that's not gone away entirely either.
To think that process was harder on the PlayStation than it was with Sonic 3 and Knuckles.
Yeah. You'd think if any system has the capacity to be like, oh yeah, we totally see your save data from this other game. Cool, let's go. It would be the PlayStation, but no, that's not how that worked. They had to make sure you had the physical disc at all times. I don't know. I have a really mixed opinion of the legacy of DLC, and yes, even the legacy of indie games, just given what we now have.
Yeah, and it's no surprise that this matter, like so many, are more involved than just DLC good or DLC bad. Patch good or patch bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think even the idea of indie games, on the one hand, yes, we have way more creativity on the market right now, but on the other hand, some big successes like Minecraft paved the way for, we'll release in early access, will we actually release a full version? Who knows?
Yeah, another interesting side effect of this, I wish early access was something that never really happened, but unfortunately that ship has sailed.
Yeah, and I feel like, again, for the Supergiant example, they basically went, okay, we showed the process for this kind of practice with our previous game, that ship has sailed, now we're going to tackle that practice of early access development and work practices at studios, and we're going to try our best to do it right.
But on the other hand, early access has paved the way for, getting back full circle, a lot of indie creators, especially solo devs, who have to start a project with very little resources, especially given, the economy and the time crunch these days, get something onto Patreon and, actually start making some income on it while they're developing it, which is very hard in just about any circumstance, short of, like, really nasty venture capital.
But on the other hand, let's talk about VVVVV.
How many hands do we have right now?
Plan. Too many. Also not enough.
Probably 12, given the game.
VVVVVV. This is a game I've watched a lot of speedruns of and have never touched myself at all.
Same.
In fact, this whole thing started because I was looking specifically for the song from VVVVVV, used in Invictus by Juzzcook, a ROM hack for Mario World. I didn't end up picking that song. I picked this other one because I thought it sounded cool. But, like, that's something I discovered about myself over the course of this episode. I have apparently did not get in on the ground floor of any of this. I actually did the opposite. I apparently got into the indie scene late. I'm playing a lot more indie games now than I did back then, clearly, because I'm looking through the list and I'm like, I played 2 games on my list for any period of time, and of those 2 games, one of them we cut before the episode, so yay?
Fascinating.
Honestly, I'm on the same boat because I haven't played the majority of the games we're about to talk about. I think I've played one of the games we're going to talk about.
I played one for more than 5 minutes.
I had to make so many cuts of so many games I've played. I'm going to know what I'm going to talk about. I've played VVVVV, I've played the next game and the one after that, and so on and so forth. I think there's only 2 games I haven't played.
Right, so it doesn't surprise me that you're the one spearheading the Indie Games episode, because you know the topic way better than me, at least especially from this era. As I said, back in those days, I was mostly playing on Congregate and Armor Games and even Newgrounds. Never really, there were only 2 games that I really, 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 truly remember from those days, and that's an RPG called Sunny, about a zombie.
I was going to say exactly... I was on Congregate too. Remember Sunny?
Oh god, that game was incredible. Yeah. I could not find what year it came out, so I had to cut a pick from that. And then another pick that one of you guys did was the only other game on this list I played for more than a few minutes. So in VVVVVV's case, I have a very limited memory of the music. That doesn't stop this song from being really cool, though. You know, I listened through the whole soundtrack, and it's like, again, I meant to be the one that was in Invictus, but for this one, it's just a really heroic vibe, very cool melody. The drop at 135 is like, I get it. People talked about that one in the comments, and I'm like, I listened to it a few times, I'm like, I get this. This really, you know, jams you up.
Yeah, as a brief aside, Sunny would have fit it first released on December 28th, 2007.
Drat. Oh, I would have loved to get a Sunny song in here. Because I do remember that song was that soundtrack was actually pretty good. I don't remember much of it, but I remember enjoying it at the time.
Yeah, Sunny was the perfect example of a game that had no right being as good as it was.
Oh my god, that is legitimately a truly memorable RPG that I played on Flash on Congregate.
Yeah.
Or no, it was Armor Games. That one was Armor Games.
Oh, I played it on Congregate.
Did I play it on Congregate or Armor? I know Sunny 2, I believe, was actually like Congregate exclusive for a while. I think they paid for the development, but okay, this is totally irrelevant. Yeah. I would have loved to have gotten that in there, and in an alternate universe, I would have figured out the year and actually gotten one of those in there. But for now, we're dealing with a game I haven't played, which is this. And, I mean, yeah, this song just sounds good.
Yeah, and it does so while also fitting some very specific constraints, aesthetic constraints, and musical constraints because of the era it's calling back to. It's primarily a nostalgic game for people that were in the Commodore and Amiga era.
Yeah, although obviously it's got way more tracks on the music than you'd ever be able to get off of that.
Of course, and same for the visuals and the lack of transition, but I've seen some games of that era after having played VVVVV. I don't exactly remember on which platform, but using the library of sprites that were already there in order to make platforms and obstacles and moving things, that was very much a thing, and I think that's a very integral part of indie landscape to have this callback to previous era, and that's why a lot of games that weren't outside of the kind of flash visual of schools, like your Isaacs and your Castle Crashers and the likes, were what was derogatorily called pixel shit at the time.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember the Sega Saturn, especially in the US, was extremely angry about the existence of pixel and 2D games and really wanted to push the 3D thing.
Oh, yeah.
And I think a lot of that creativity ended up in the indie scene a few years later, and that resulted in games like this one becoming popular because people do actually want to play this stuff.
With a small stint that was very much unsung for the artist on plug-and-play systems, which is why there's a whole era of licensed plug-and-play cheapo systems that have somehow incredible pixel art and animations, even though it's like a Shrek game or a SpongeBob SquarePants game that's plug-and-play and that you bought at Target for $20.
I feel like I actually do remember that.
I may have talked about part of it after learning of it.
This conversation sounds very familiar.
But basically, there's a through line from the original game to that kind of things to either the mobile market or indie studios.
That is actually a very interesting through line because you mentioned the licensed plug-and-play games like SpongeBob and whatnot. And to jump a few years ahead of the timeline of this episode, now in the 2020s, we're having indie games with crossovers with AAA franchises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Power Wash Simulator just got a frickin' FF7 remake DLC, and you cannot convince me that Power Wash isn't an indie game. I'm sorry, it is. Like, yes, it's published by Square. I don't care.
Yeah,
this is
I
not...
mean, it's not like they didn't do the practice at the time. Square Enix also published in 2011 a match-free game named Gyromancer.
Oh, I was not aware of that.
And I was not aware that apparently the composer for Soul Eye was reportedly, according to the Wikipedia page, approached after he heard a song composed by the guy from a game named Space Phallus.
Oh. Okay.
So, things go in an interesting way.
Yeah, it's funny to see how this all comes together. It really is. And
honestly, that's kind of
history
my
of it
through
is...
line for this episode. It's that
the
book wasn't written, so you kind of have to figure things out as you go.
To quote the author of Wolf Hall, none of these people know they're in a story.
Oh, that's strong.
Mm-hmm. All right. I don't have much to say on this song, and we totally tangented off to the history of indie games, so let's actually talk about another important one, Plants vs. Zombies.
Yeah, while a lot of studios were very small operations, I think at the time, if you look at the kind of larger scale repository of what was still indies, there's definitely your Armor Games, and I would say PopCap definitely counts. In fact, they were big enough that they eventually got bought by EA.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm going to be honest. I've never actually played Plants vs. Zombies. I have watched several streams of Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare, which is a quasi-Rainbow Six clone of all things.
Yep.
It's a lot better than it sounds.
Yes.
But, never actually played the original, in part because, by this point, PopCap and I were not on speaking terms. They installed a very angry app onto my computer at the time without, like, I could not get rid of this thing. And it's just like, I'm trying to uninstall you, I'm trying to erase you, you keep coming back, go away.
No.
So when this game came out, I was already very, very, very angry at PopCap Games. So I never played it.
The internet was not a safe place in those days.
No, it was not.
Especially if you fired your emule and played the MP3 roulette. But that was maybe a few years prior still.
Yeah, I don't think I ever did that.
I'll just give a quick shout out to Blue Maximus Flashpoint for people who wanna experience these old Flash games without the viruses and whatnot, because that's a very solid collection of Flash games. But yeah, I don't recall ever actually playing Plants vs Zombies either. I've watched it, and I know how it plays by osmosis, but I don't think I've played it myself.
I definitely did. I finished it, in fact.
Oh, wow.
Got the credit song, which has actual lyrics and everything.
Fancy.
And yeah, the way it works for this game is that there's some mini games, but otherwise the main story mode is essentially you've got the back garden, and then you have a night version, and then you have the pool, a night version, rooftop, night version. And on every level there's also a different theme for the bossways, which are exactly as you might expect, a bit stronger waves, which test how established your defenses are. And yeah, no, it's a nicely crafted game that's very relaxing, very pre-second screen, widespread use, second screen experience in a way. And they went with Laura Shigihara for a composer, which I didn't know about before. But
that name sounds familiar.
The work certainly it's the kind of song that stays in your head for a while.
I think this we already kind of covered it with the VVVV song, but this one also shows with the composer, which also rings a bell, but I can't quite put my finger on why. But it kind of shows that indie games, even early on, they already had some solid composers around, including some, as we will come to find later in this episode, some famous ones. Honestly, this song surprised me when I listened to it. I don't recall actually listening to it in playthroughs of the game.
And it's just a normal stage theme.
Yeah, like it has this more happy, let's say, bit in the middle, but the first and last thirds of the song are sort of a little bit ominous. There's a piano melody that kind of makes me think of Castlevania of all things.
I have that comment about a different song, but I definitely felt like I was dungeon crawling at a sewer level.
Yeah, it reminded me of the watery areas in the GBA Castlevanias for some reason.
Which kind of makes sense,
totally
given that it's the pool area, so there's this water aspect, since you have essentially two of the middle lanes that are water, and you have to manage that with different kinds of plants.
Fun fact, and this is going to come around in a moment. So my exact comment here was, are we sure this is from a tower defense game? Says the Arknights player. But yeah, no, they actually remade the pool map in one of the recent events in Arknights, although it was certainly a lot more complicated given how that game plays. It's not like... That's not a simplistic game. It's definitely a few generations of tower defense reiteration.
Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the main lessons from this podcast, not just this episode, but this podcast, is do not underestimate the power of the soundtrack to a tower defense game.
Right?
Unless that game you're underestimating is called Defense Grid, because that's alright, but not as memorable, perhaps, as this game. I mean, it had reference to it in World of Warcraft in, like, 2011 or something.
I like the piano sample, kind of, on this track. I would have liked to have heard a version with traditional piano, though. I feel like the sample's a little weird.
It's kind of
I do like how it's the iterations on a theme, though. I like how it kind of builds.
Yeah, the piano sounds kind of thin. That's how I would describe it. I definitely would like to hear an actual piano, this one.
Yeah, but at the same time, given the look of the game, which is very much in that Flash games set of graphics and looks and the likes, going for something maybe above the pay grade would have been a bit weird. Like, I can see real good piano samples or live piano used being a thing for the games that came after, but for the original, it seems a bit out of scope.
I mean, it seems a bit out of scope, but they're just using MIDI samples at this point. Like, there's nothing to say they couldn't use it. Like, they're deliberately using an electric piano MIDI sample here. But you can hear from the drums that they're not averse to more naturalistic sounding instruments, and there's this tubular bell segment as well. Like, no, I don't think a more naturalistic piano would have been overkill here. I mean, I would say a live instrument piano would have been for sure, but a more accurate sample? I don't buy that one. I think a version of that wouldn't have been terrible.
At the very least, it certainly wouldn't have been terrible to have it released for us to listen to, even if out of the game. I'm not familiar with any other version of the song.
Yeah, and it's not like...
There could be a remix album somewhere.
And she's clearly worked on remix albums after the composer worked with Yasunori Mitsuda on a Chrono Cross 20th anniversary album, so...
That's where I've heard the name. I have that album. Okay. That makes sense now.
It all comes together.
I'm like, why does that name sound familiar? Oh, okay, cool. I can absolutely identify that album now.
Very good, then. Now that this has been clarified, let's run up to the next topic and talk about Canabalt.
See, what did you
This is the one game I played!
Yeah, it's the one I played as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's...
So, fun fact. Hang on, I've got to tell the story before we start. I wanted to pick this song. I had forgotten what the name of the game was.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't remember. It was this thing where you're running on the rooftops and there was explosions and apocalypse in the background. And it was just an infinite runner. It was like one of the first infinite runners. And there was this really cool like electronic track to it. And I don't remember the name of this game. Damn it.
I think it's
whatever. I'll pick something else. And then I see
runners.
Idie's.
Like, I think the Dinosaur Extinction one came before.
Maybe Temple Run too, but
I think...
Yeah, it's...
I remember... I saw a video on the history of runner games. I sadly don't remember what YouTuber made that video. If I rediscover, maybe I'll add that as a extra credit on the episode description. But I believe Canabalt came before Temple Run. Canabalt was at first on Flash, I believe.
Yeah. Another game I played on probably Congregate.
Yeah. I think I played exactly on Congregate. I can speak, I swear. But it's a very simplistic game. It's just you press one button to jump.
Yeah, you have a jump button and that's it.
And yet it's so fun. And I wouldn't be surprised to learn that there might be a through line between this kind of game and idle games.
That wouldn't surprise me at all, though I think we were already starting to see idlers by that point.
Yeah, I think Cookie Clicker might have already been a thing.
Probably.
Perhaps, but the line I see is that it's more that, I mean, this pick knocked off two of my pick, which made the cutting process way easier, by the way. But that's because the composer is one Danny Baranowsky.
I know that name.
Yeah, previously of OC Remix fame.
Right.
And then he worked on that. According to the wiki page, he got to work on that because the dev of Canabalt, Adam Saltzman, sent him an incomplete version of a game he intended to have without music, and he made music for it anyway. And then he was like, okay, that's cool. And then he made Canabalt, which was surprisingly high profile, and then that got him introduced to other names, and that's how he got involved with little games such as Super Meat Boy and The Binding of Isaac.
Right, which are themselves like these indie giants.
I just wanna note a couple things, because Ren is kind of selling him short here, because the dude also worked on desktop dungeons alongside Grant Kirkhope of Donkey Kong Country fame, and he also was part of the soundtrack for Cadence of Hyrule, which was the Nintendo licensed version of Crypt of the Necrodancer,
which he also composed the soundtrack for
a DLC. But yes. Yeah, so we're continuing the conversation of even early indie games already having big name composers, even if in this case he wasn't yet big at the time.
And that's why he sold
One of
himself
our later
short,
songs is going to have an outright...
That hadn't happened yet.
One of our later composers in this topic ended up becoming one of the titans of the industry.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
But yeah, as for the song, just go back a few steps. The song "Run" from Canabalt, it does exactly what I think that game needed a song like this to do. It just propels you forward,
100%. And
it's very fun and very energetic.
Yeah, it's got this like dark energy to it that's really cool. It goes into creepy at the 2-minute mark, which gives, it changes the pace nicely, but it's a good sense of what this one level is.
Honestly, it kind of gets me wondering, what are you running from? Because I don't think the game ever explains, and the menacing sound is very interesting.
Yeah, you break out of a window and go. And you see just destruction in the background, things are happening, but it never actually explains it. I think that kind of works to its benefit. It's very simplistic. It doesn't oversell
Where's
it.
the bad theory on this one?
I think that that's the game's strength, and the soundtrack definitely contributes to it, is that I feel that it says, here is the most simple game concept we have. How much can we polish it?
100%.
And one thing about this song that really is a little unusual, not like so unusual as to be like really a standout, but something I like. It's something that doesn't happen too often. The harmony is actually in the treble on this one, and the bass line contains the primary melody, which is a nice reversal of how it usually works and creates more of a sense of tension, and I think it's a very cool composition tool.
Yeah, it fits how booming everything feels.
Yeah.
So talking about games that have this very much Flash feel to them, I think Alien Hominid HD is one of the better fit there.
Well, the original, I believe, was a Flash game, and then the HD one is a more polished, like, actual release.
Yeah, I think it was on Newgrounds, sort of like Castle Crashers.
Yeah,
I think it was. I don't know if it was... I don't know if it was directly from Tom Fulp and his people, but I know it's something like that.
Both games were from VB Himov and have the same composer.
So here's my confession. I don't care about the song at all, actually.
No.
I picked it.
You did.
But it doesn't really do anything that Run doesn't do better. The most unique part of the ducked drums, which means like there's a segment where the drums and everything else kind of backs off and it's mixed down, and then it comes back in, and I'm like, that's kind of cool. That creates a vibe, and that's about all I can really remember right now.
The image is definitely different. It's way more electronic.
Yeah, I don't know. I picked this game almost at random. It's like, I remember this game, kind of. Let's do this one.
This is an indie game. Let's talk about this indie game, which is an indie game.
Pretty much. As I said, I wasn't really up on indie games back then, and, well, there we have it, I guess.
I got into...
Hi, I'm a guy who...
I got into indie games later on through Steam, because I didn't have a source of income. Around the time Alien Hominid HD came out, but I have no strong feelings about the song either, to be honest. I don't outright hate it, I don't think, but it doesn't do much for me either.
I don't dislike it. It's not like... this is a solid 6 out of 10. It passes for sure, but I just don't care.
I think it's... the thing it mainly does for me is that it's more foundational, like adding Hominid HD worked so that Castle Crashers and later on Battle Block Theater and Pit People could run. And those are some soundtrack I really like, but adding Hominid isn't one that I've played per se. So I like, yeah, it's a nice little soundtrack to shoot some goons in a Flash game.
At last, we find a game on this episode that even Rana hasn't played.
Don't make me fire it up. I could. I'm pretty sure I've gotten it on Steam on like one of the early Humble bundles.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I own it for more or less the same reason, which is just a random bundle or something.
I don't even own it. I think the Humble bundles at the time were too expensive for me.
Never mind, it's Alien Breed I have, not Alien Hominid.
Oh, and I have Alien Isolation, which is totally a different
yes.
thing.
Slightly different, yes. The mood is exactly the same somehow.
I mean...
Oh, yeah, no, it's...
perfect game to be hunted by an alien.
Pretty much.
Anyway.
I know very little about this. I used it to fill out my picks, and I regret doing so now, because I could have put a track from Sunny here, and I messed up and I didn't. So let this all stand as a reminder of my inability to do basic research, I guess, and let's move on, maybe.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. I guess I'll just take the moment to confess that I know so little about Alien Hominid that I sometimes think they might be invaders in background characters.
I mean, they definitely have that vibe.
They have that look, for sure. One almost certainly inspired the other. I have no idea which one came first, and I'm not going to try to figure it out.
But anyway, let's follow in sequence then with Before the Echo, which at the time was called Sequence, but then a sequel came called There Came an Echo, and this was retroactively put in the same universe with its name changed.
Cool?
I
know nothing about this game, but I have serious comments about this song.
Alright then. But me first, to explain a little bit what this game is. It's...
Please do.
3 games of Dance Dance Revolution that fire at the same time and also an RPG.
Uh-huh.
What?
Yeah, so you have 3 screens you can rotate to in order to select which one is active. You have the main one that provides you mana when you do the inputs, and then you can rotate towards the defense screen, where if you don't do those inputs, you take damage, but these inputs have gaps in them that lets you regain your mana, or do attacks, which are pre-recorded sequence that you fire off when you fire the attack to validate it. And you have to juggle between all 3 of them, which starts completely messing with your brain and end up with you looking like an absolute mutant. It's a pretty fun game.
Nice.
Very good concept. And its main strength, I believe, is that for a small budget title, even at release, it had some incredibly high quality voice acting, because the founder of Iridium Studio is a voice actor. Most known, I believe, for voicing Byakuya Togami in Danganronpa, which are some words that have meaning.
I know what Danganronpa is. Like, I've never played it because I'm not really a visual novel guy, but I do get it.
Excellent.
Yeah, you said this was a DDR-style, like, rhythm game,
Yes.
but that just makes me even more baffled about this song, because, like, the drums are so thin, and the hi-hat is so overblown, and I'm like, isn't this supposed to have rhythm?
Yeah, it's a bit weird because it's crunchy to the point where it becomes brittle.
Yeah. No, this song is mixed like an absolute disaster area. Like, this is a song that I want the stems for. I want the individual tracks. Let me mix this. I'll do a better job.
Well, the one you'll have to ask for is as one Ronald Jenkees.
I might have to just kidnap this guy, beat him up, throw him in the trunk of my motorcycle, and, torture him until he gives me the stems.
Please don't. At least not while leaving proof on tape.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, does this count as a confession?
I believe it does.
Not yet.
It would, retroactively. And if we can change the name of video games, surely this can count too. Anyway.
I'm insulted by the mix of this song. I'm actually professionally insulted.
If it's any reassurance, not all the tracks are this vibe, but this one feels different and feels kind of panicky like that. It's one of the boss tracks initially, but what happens is that you have a stage boss, and then on the levels after that, they are reused for random encounters of sorts.
Okay.
But on the first play, definitely makes more sense than on the 15th as you grind for that stupid item with a 12% drop chance that somehow doesn't drop.
I don't think that this is a particularly I don't think it's poorly composed at all. Actually, I like a lot of what this song does. I just can't hear a lot of it over the sound of this absolutely just pathetically, just insanely overblown hi-hat cymbal. It's just so loud and so overpowering, and it just distracts. Let me explain a little something about frequency response. I'm sorry. I'm in engineer mode, guys. Here we go. So, the normal range of human...
Grab your popcorn, listeners.
The normal range of human hearing... Thank you. The normal range of human hearing is 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Hi-hats kind of sit in the upper realm of this. It's very high-end. Not a whole lot of other instruments do that. So you don't... To fit hi-hats into a mix, you don't actually need to get them that loud. And a lot of times when I'm mixing or mastering someone else's work, and they have these just crazy overblown hi-hats, that's what I tell them. I'm like, yo, take this down a bit. I'm going to have to compress the heck out of these because they're just overpowering everything. And I understand you want them to seem as loud as you are, but you don't need as much power to get them to be audible in the mix. This is that same amateur hour mistake of just blasting out your hi-hats and just overpowering the entire rest of the track. Meanwhile, the actual mixing on the drums is extremely thin. I don't want to say I can barely make them out because they're clearly there, but there's no meat to them. They're just very brittle, as you said. And I'm just like, it has this just really cool guitar intro that I can't really hear. It has this, it has this like
kind of Indian vibe as well. Is probably one of my favorite.
Yeah.
Parts.
There was one of they're like, is that a sitar? That's cool. I could barely hear it over these damn hi-hats. So yeah, no, I'm this is just such an amateur hour mistake, and I'm like, who let this go to broadcast like this? I'm angry. This makes me angry.
Well, that was
Don't do
Ronald
this.
Jenkees, in fact. And also worthy of note, these tracks weren't composed for the game. They were licensed, and the whole rhythm game was kind of put over a mix of a couple of previous cities from Jenkees.
This is even more baffling.
That is weird.
Yeah.
But for a game concept that's sweet, I think it all kind of fits. Like, it's all equal levels of a strangeness that form an off-kilter but coherent narrative and sequence event. It's basically this kind of independent guy that was like,
Right.
Here's a concept I have, and here's this one indie rock/rap/electronic artist that I also like. I'm going to throw a bit of money around, throw a little bit of effort around, and try to make it all work. The game's pretty fun.
Yeah, I'll have to take your word for it, because when I listen to this track, again, I know nothing about this game. The first impression I got was that with this, let's say, chaotic energy, probably precisely because of the mixing issues, it kind of made me think of a fighting game, like the chaos of a 2D fighting game, particularly in the sprite era of fighters.
Yeah, I can see that.
Which makes it...
And shout out to...
Go.
Sorry.
Which makes it kind of weird as a fit for the genres you just described us.
It's a fight theme anyway.
Yeah. And on the subject of fighting games, shout out to Deathbed, the Bed That Eats, apparently joining the cast of Guilty Gear. What the heck was that?
It's the lingering soul of the previous Batman protecting what is the new Batman, which is not a bad normal man, but protected by the previous Batman. It makes sense in the lore.
That's even more literally Deathbed, the Bed That Eats. Does this development team have a thing for, like, 70s era exploitation films? Because it's starting to sound that way.
Probably.
Honestly, I stopped to read the wiki page for the character. I was just like, why is this bad more powerful than the most powerful character in the roster up to the previous game?
This has nothing to do with the current track.
No.
No, it doesn't, but you mentioned 2D fighting games and I couldn't get that out of my head. Anyway, moving on.
Moving on to the next track, in fact.
Moving on to...
Here's a band I didn't expect to see on here, that's for sure.
Yeah, talking about big names in indie game composers. This was probably licensed, I'm gonna guess, but it's a symphonic black metal song by Dimmu Borgir.
For the game?
Insanely Twisted Shadow Planet, which is a mouthful of a title just like the titles of the Dimmu Borgir songs.
Yeah, this one threw me off. I will say, I don't... Musically, it doesn't really have much in common with black metal. I gotta be honest. It's very melodic death metal with black metal trappings.
It made me think of Heroes of Might and Magic.
Yeah, especially that opening,
Yes.
for sure. Like, there's a good 2 minutes of, like, symphonic instrumental. I'm like, oh, okay, they just did a symphonic instrumental song. And then the actual heavy metal kicks in. I'm like, nope, that's just a 2-minute intro. Go.
Yeah, from what I remember, Dimmu Borgir kind of entered into a phase where they were doing that every time after the 2001 album Puritanical Euphoric Misanthropia, which I believe they had an actual orchestra for, so they went just full on into symphonic mode from then on. I believe the album this song comes from is a 2003 album, so very much in that era of them overdoing on the symphonic front and leaving the black metal as sort of background noise.
But yeah, musically, this has more in common, honestly, with like Soilwork than anybody else, which is a weird thing to say, given.
A lot of people,
like, I don't hear like Emperor or Burzum or even Behemoth in here.
I've seen a lot of people just describe Dimmu Borgir nowadays as a symphonic gothic metal band, which I guess it fits.
That's a little more accurate, I'd say.
But yeah, I used to be into Dimmu Borgir as a teenager. Spot the guy who used to main a Death Knight in Warcraft, I guess.
I mean, same.
Nowadays, it kind of for me. Just lives in the background. But it's not a bad song.
This was right when I was starting to get into heavy metal, like for real, and I just never gossed onto this band at all. And even this song, like now, is like, well, if this came up on a playlist, I wouldn't turn it off or anything, but it doesn't really do anything for me. It's just sort of there.
Yeah, I kind of got into them retrospectively, let's say. I was really more getting into the harsher side of metal around 2008, I think. So I was definitely listening to this album way after it came out. I have no idea what the game where it plays is like. I only know it has sort of a chaotic visuals to it. So
the look of it reminds me of World of Goo somehow.
Yeah, funny you say that because initially I thought World of Goo was the game they had a song in, but no, it's Insanely Twisted Shadow Planet, which I have no idea how it plays,
Hooray.
but it has it's the visuals from what I've seen, they kind of look like World of Goo, but way harsher, like a lot of points and straight lines instead of blobs.
Here's one thing about the song that really threw me off. There's a breakdown at about the 5-minute mark in the song. My exact comments was, sounds like evil Nightwish.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, I don't know. I have trouble, like, associating this song with a game just because it's a band I'm at least remotely familiar with.
Yeah, but at the same time, I put the previous track, this one, and the one that comes next, because there's a through line there of one of the possibilities of early indies, which was, I'm making a game and I'm not a composer, but here's this band or this guy I like the song of, so I'm going to license that.
Yeah, which is totally valid. I mean, we were talking about that just last episode, how, there's a part of me, and I really want to kick this part in the butt, but there's a part of me that thinks that licensed music is cheating when it comes to game development. That part is wrong. I understand this, but it is that part that is still there, and situations like this one, like Before the Echo, like Eradication and Six is Find, and like the song we're going to be talking about next, really do kind of show that, yeah, that's a very valid technique. Music supervision is hard, and getting it to match your game is very difficult. And if you do it right, it really can enhance the experience. I don't know if Dimmu Borgir's song on this game, Insanely Twisted Shadow Planet, accomplishes this. I have no context for it, but...
Yeah, all I know is that they have 2 songs by Dimmu Borgir that play in actual gameplay, and then a few more that play in cutscenes. This is one from actual gameplay. I deliberately chose to bring something from gameplay instead of a cutscene. But I also have no idea how the game plays, so I have no idea how this might empower the feeling of the player going through the game, or if it might just do the opposite. I have no idea. What I can say is this is the exact sort of stuff my teenage Death Knight playing self would have listened to, but I kind of grew out of that, so if you're into Dimmu Borgir, you would probably dig this one. I'm just not into them anymore.
Well, I'm reminded, I don't remember what episode this was, but I talked about the Lightning Swords of Death doing music for Undead Knights once upon a time. And that was a situation where, yes, an actual black metal band actually did enhance the experience of the game, because it was like a zombie Dynasty Warriors game that was very, very, like, edgy and angry for no reason. And that really did fit the mood. I've never played World of Goo. I've never even heard of World of Goo. So I don't know, like, if a spin-off to World of Goo, if this sort of music would even fit that. I wish I had more context. I may need to actually look this up a little more.
Yeah, I'm not sure the 2 games are related. I know World of Goo is sort of a puzzle platformer where you build bridges by connecting little black blobs together. I have no idea what Insanely Twisted Shadow Planet is like. I only know it as the game with a black metal band, the indie game with a black metal band providing part of the soundtrack.
I would not enjoy a puzzle platformer with this sort of music. I need to be able to stop and think when it comes to puzzle platformers, not get blasted on by death metal.
What you don't need, however, to stop and think for is the next game.
Correct. Rana, how did you put this? The game that basically brute forced Devolver Digital into existence?
Yeah.
Turf from Hotline Miami. Again, a game I've watched a lot of speedruns and playthroughs of, so I'm a lot more familiar with this one. than I am some of my other picks, despite never having actually played it for more than a couple minutes. I think I played the first 2 levels.
I played
and
it
never
and
got
it
back
made
to
me
it.
motion sick.
Oof.
I believe that. That game is... Yeah.
It does feel over the top in that regard.
But it
Yeah.
makes sense. This game is a trip on the worst and best possible sense of the world. All of it deliberately.
Yes, this game definitely had, like, an agenda.
Yeah.
And I think that was laid a little more bare in the second game.
Definitely.
But at the same time, like, it was still actually, like, fun to play and interesting.
Exactly.
It wasn't like... I played a lot of games that try to be subversive by being awful on purpose, and I'm like, why am I playing an awful game? Shut up and go away. This is not one of those. This is a legitimately great game. It's just, you know, it's an assault on your senses and sensibilities.
Yeah. And
probably would assault Jane Austen too, just to be honest.
And one with a very fitting soundtrack. It's
oh yeah,
it's the kind of soundtrack you have like on a movie montage as somebody gets on the verge of overdosing.
Yeah, for sure. Which again, funny given the second game's final level.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, this is just a really great song. It just gets real wild around the 1 minute mark. It comes out swinging, but it's like really just tense, and it's very fair considering the style of game that Hotline Miami is. It's another one of these just historically very important kind of games that I think that even people who haven't played probably at least know.
And it's funny because the game is strong enough that while its aesthetics are extremely important, including the music aspect of it, and it all synergizes, but it doesn't seem like they got a soundtrack and made a game around it somehow. It stands on its own, but it all works on an even level, which is impressive given how it was an early hit.
Yeah, it isn't the center of the experience. It's another brick that builds it. That's how I would describe it.
It
reinforces.
Insanely confident.
Yeah, the soundtrack reinforces it, but it's not like the basis of everything on the game. And yeah, it's a pretty fun song, and the whole soundtrack is very, very energetic. Another game I haven't played, but I've heard a lot of its soundtrack. And
I said confidence, and I think that's the key here, because even in gameplay, you can try and get methodical with it, but more often than not, you're going to be surprised by something that you didn't expect, and if you rush through it and act like a brutal maniac, you have much more sense of success.
And
which is actually kind of funny, because one of those things that wasn't expected in one of the playthroughs I saw was a dog just clipping through a wall and getting a dude from behind.
Oof.
Yeah. It's still an indie game. It's not perfect, and some of the collision boxes are a little
questionable.
Questionable. That's a much better word for it. Thank you.
Just as an aside, I think it's fun to take another peek behind the curtain here, just to illustrate the aspect of how important this game is to video game history that Galen brought up, because this is a game that all three of us thought of bringing up in this episode. I think Rana said he made this as one of the final cuts of his list because he wanted to dive into more lesser known stuff, let's say. I was thinking of adding it to my list, and I went, nah, someone else will bring it up. And then Galen showed up and had it on his list. So yes, we were all on the right track here.
Yeah, you want to talk indie games from this period, the rise of indie games and the powerhouse they are in the market today. You kind of can't not talk about this game.
Especially if we were talking about the soundtracks of the time.
I mean, you can't not talk about Bastion, and yet
somehow we started...
I mean, now I'm reminded of our stealth episode where somehow we missed Metal Gear. Like, all right, good job.
we started this episode thinking about Supergiant, and we avoided completely Supergiant.
Right? we did not manage to avoid this one, and I'm glad we didn't. Because, like, even just take it on its own, divorced from the historical need of it, this song is just good.
Good song. Drives you forward.
Yeah. I actually have some interesting things to say about the next song. So
Alright.
I'm just going to go ahead and...
let's go there. Because it's not all Western indies.
No.
And one of the games was pivotal to a complete change of shifts and perception in how Japanese games were handled on the PC platform.
Yeah, now we have our start of indie localization teams.
Yes. With Recettear.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, the theme for when the shop is closed and you take your moment to rearrange and restock the shelves and all that. And I don't like this song.
Really?
Yeah, it's charming in principle, but it's definitely screechy in parts, and it's got this kind of high variance that can be a bit grating for a theme you're going to hear a lot.
You know, I'm glad you said you didn't like the song, because I was afraid that I was gonna crap all over a song you enjoyed, because I hate this one.
Oh.
Am I the only one who liked it? What the heck?
I really don't like the sound of what I guess is supposed to be a harmonica. It's just so annoying to me.
I just picture the fairy that acts as your assistant/accountant/debt collector going doot in your ears.
Oh no. Yeah, okay, so in the playlist at the time, we were all separated by, entrant, not our current playlist.
Yeah.
So I listened to this one right after I listened to Before the Echo.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so I still had the terrible mixing of that in my mind. So maybe I gave this one more of a pass than I should have if you guys hate it this much.
It's not this much. It's fine, but it is definitely a bit grating when you focus on what's kind of wind instrument that's on the forefront and not the kind of operette that's in the background and that works in itself.
Yeah, I do definitely dislike this one, but it's kind of a, let's say, a historical dislike of that specific sound. I never enjoy it when video game soundtracks use it. Which
Remember,
I think
to fight Eddie, use the doot.
Yeah, pretty much.
Got it.
Yeah, I think that was more common in the PS1 days, if I recall correctly. Nowadays,
and it's got very much a PS1 feel.
Yeah, nowadays we don't hear that sound as often.
3D backgrounds with sprites on top of it. It's basically the Grandia method. For how it looks.
So this, I said that this song sounds kind of Falcom-esque, which is kind of funny given that this localization team ended up getting subcontracted by Exceed for Trails in the Sky second chapter.
Very much so, yes. That's how they kind of get the name around.
Yeah, but I mean that ended in disaster, unfortunately. Yeah. There's a whole story about how bad that localization went, largely because this team just couldn't handle it.
They bit off more than they could chew, really.
Yeah. So that was most of my point, because I have played second chapter, so I'm familiar with the backstory of this game, having not played it myself, but the fact that it's kind of, at least on the surface, stylistically similar does show why they were hired in the first place, at the very least.
Yeah, and this game was insanely influential in that regard, because while the game itself is honestly pretty fun, what's more relevant was that it was an early indie Japanese game that was localized and brought to Steam, which just wasn't really a thing at that time outside of Cave Story, which has its own publishing issues that came after. But then they came and they did that, and the game that came before and after, and I'm not saying I absolutely love 14 Summoners. but I cosplayed the character, and the character looks like a 12-year-old girl. That's how much I loved that character. I still have the outfit in my cupboard, actually.
Is it weird that part of me
right
want to see pictures of that?
Unfortunately, I don't have them on hand. I think they are on some old Facebook group, and I've stopped using Facebook like 8 years ago.
As you should.
Indeed.
Yep.
But yeah, it's probably one of the two main landmarks of Japanese games that were unexpectedly ported on PC and proved that it was viable. The other being one of the endpoints that was chosen for the theme of this episode, being Dark Souls.
I mean, given that it was published by Namco, I have a hard time calling Dark Souls indie. And From Software,
I'm not saying it's indie. I'm saying it's in the same effort of making Steam a platform for Japanese video games, which it really wasn't.
Okay, that is very fair.
Yeah.
That is very fair.
But for the game itself and the track, it's a shop management simulator / dungeon crawler where you have to manage the high and lows and the influx and customers, including kind of a mini game where you have to not only sell item to item, but build up combos in order to build up your EXP, even if it means selling under market price to that annoying little girl that asks for an expensive item, even though she only has probably like $200 on her. And that's an infuriating kind of combo breaker, but you definitely need it in order to grow exponentially, which you need in order to be able to settle your debts that keep racking up, and the deadlines won't wait for you.
That sounds like a very personal experience.
Yeah,
it's personal to anyone
like
that plays this game. That's how the game is played, and it's very fun like that. The dungeon crawling is a bit basic, perhaps, but it's serviceable.
I remember seeing reviews at the time. The game seemed pretty fun.
It is.
What I had listened of the soundtrack.
I think the song is cute.
What I had listened of the soundtrack in those reviews, that sounded fine to me. Like cutesy, but fine, pretty cool. This one just has a sound I can't stand.
And it's. I'm not sure how to express that, but it kind of feels like while other games were more like, here's this guy that started on OC Remix and that got to this and that made this game, and here's this guy I licensed. This one feels more like we are a small studio making small budget titles, and we have a small budget composer that's going to do what we expect of them, and that's going to work. We like 3 people in 3 different basements all throughout the country, but we're making it work. It's got that scrappy energy, you know?
Yeah, I will say that.
And in fact, I respect it.
Yeah, I'll definitely say that the sound fits 100% the aesthetics. It might not be my thing for this song in particular, but it definitely seems to work with the aesthetics as far as I know from the game. So it's not badly composed or anything like that.
Anyway, Recettear is a good game.
One day I might try it. I'm meaning to, just never got around to it.
I recommend it.
And on the subject of games I never got around to.
Well, then let's go on a journey.
I see what you did there again. So yeah, we were talking, well, mostly I was talking earlier about indie games that surprisingly had big name composers. Well, we have Austin Wintory here.
To be fair, at this point they already had 2 pretty successful games under their belt.
And yet, he was the composer for their first game as well. Flow.
Honestly, the real shame was that after Flow and Flower, they didn't name this game Flowest.
Oh God.
Am I wrong, though?
Thanks.
Am I?
Yes.
Well, sure.
Yes. Anyway, so this is actually, and for reasons I will explain later, the song on this list I am the most personally familiar with. In fact, it's been running through my head pretty much nonstop since I heard it on the list. I didn't actually know its title, and I'll talk about why later. But like the second I heard the chord progression, I'm like, oh, I know this song.
And the title certainly fits.
It does. It's gorgeous.
Title being Apotheosis.
Yeah, I think in a previous episode of the podcast, I mentioned how I was a bit disappointed when Austin Wintory came to compose for Assassin's Creed when he did Syndicate, especially because that game had a weird philosophy where music would mostly just play when you were in the atop the buildings. I don't get it, but I've missed in that game something as iconic as Apotheosis is to Journey. This is one of Wintory's masterpieces.
This is a really great song. I actually also didn't know who composed it until today, for reasons which I will again talk about later.
So how did you hear so much about it if you haven't played it? Oh no, at the time, who was the composer? Was it also an Invictus track?
No, though that would be very interesting if it were. Wow, now I wonder what a Mario level with this song would... Anyway.
Yeah. A Celeste song, maybe, though.
I think that album certainly has been done. No, I heard this somewhere else entirely. I heard this at the Hollywood Bowl. At Video Games Live.
Nah.
Oh boy.
You know, by that one jerk-off.
Yep.
Who, yeah, on the live CD for this, guess who isn't credited at all?
Austin Wintory.
Austin Wintory. Yeah. So yeah, I've had the live mix running through this because this is kind of one of these standards on my video game playlist. I haven't actually removed the Video Games Live stuff, mostly because I just like how it sounds so much.
That's fair.
Please tell me the guy whose name may or may not be Thomas didn't take credit for the song.
No, it's just listed as Video Games Live on the metadata for the CD.
Lesser of two evils.
Yeah, I'm not thrilled with it because, you know, please credit your composers.
Yes.
But yeah. It's Video Games Live Journey medley, I think it is, but it's not a medley, it's literally just this song.
Sounds about right. Honestly, when I was looking for this song, I just typed Journey on YouTube, and it just auto-completed with Apotheosis, because it is the song.
Yep. It is the song. Yeah, so, unfortunately, despite me absolutely adoring this song, I'm filled with a little bit of guilt and a tiny dash of revulsion upon hearing it, just based on what I now know and information I now possess.
Well, may we wash that guilt away by showing you the original version, which has no fingerprints from that guy.
I mean, yeah, no, this is a great song. This is just
now
wonderful.
Now you can just...
I actually think I like it a little...
No, I'm just want to say, now you can just put the original on your playlist.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I actually think I like this mix a little better than the live arrangement. Usually the Video Games Live arrangements, live arrangements are pretty good.
Yeah, especially since you'd think this one would lend itself very well to an orchestra.
Yeah, and it does, and it did.
I believe...
Which I think was kind of part of the problem. It was a very straight arrangement. Like, they didn't really change anything. So this one doesn't have the issues with live mixing. Like, obviously, if you're recording in a live environment as opposed to a studio, it's going to sound very different. Not usually as good. So you kind of make up for that with live energy, which didn't really happen here.
From what I understand, I think this may have been recorded with an orchestra on the original game as well. Because
I believe that.
Sony, the timeline for I believe they're called That Video Game Company, is that they first made Flow as a Flash game, but then Sony liked it so much they wanted to publish it on the PlayStation Store. So then came the Flowy are mostly familiar with Austin Wintory's soundtrack. And I believe they injected money into not necessarily into the development of the game itself, but it went to the art that surrounds it, like the soundtrack, the graphics, stuff like that. So I think it was actually
the creatives, as we call that.
Basically, they started having a close relationship, including in the previous game where I believe Flower was one of the technical showcase made to show the 6 axis for the PlayStation 3 DualShock.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is technically not an indie game, I suppose, but that game company, they kept the same development.
That game company was the dev, similarly to how Insanely Twisted Shadow Planet was published by Xbox Live Studios, but it was independently developed.
And even if that game company did get an injection of money from Sony, they kept the same development philosophy from Flow.
Yeah.
So I say it counts.
Like we hinted at before, we don't care if Power Wash Simulator has a relationship with Square Enix. It remains an indie game at heart.
Yeah.
It's
there's a big difference between how it's developed and how it's published, and it would not be the first time major companies have published small indie titles to give it more of a push and give it more reach, which is both a good and a bad thing, obviously. What else is new with this conversation? It's just such a mixed bag. It does so much good, and there's just so much evil.
Well, as long as it balances out, it's pretty much the best we can ask for, I feel.
Mm-hmm. And before we move on to the next song, I just have to point out one final thing about Journey's soundtrack, which is usually soundtracks are released by either independently by the developer or the publisher. Sometimes they go for smaller indie labels. This one was the soundtrack was published by Sony Classical, the actual Sony classical music label, which says a lot about the quality. I would say.
Wow.
Oh wow, they use that publishing arm. Well, okay.
Yeah.
I need to look this up now. That's actually
arm. Interesting.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. All right.
Shoutouts to Austin.
That's actually a really
again.
good piece of information. That just shows that just shows how much Sony believed in this game.
I wonder if Journey is on Steam. I know they re-release a lot of stuff via Annapurna Entertainment.
I think it's somewhere. Yeah, I seem to recall a big deal about a PC release, but I don't know if it's here or. Well, I don't have it on my Steam, but maybe you'll check Epic. Is it on Epic?
I have no idea. I'm trying to look into the details on Journey just real quick on VGMDB. Seems like it had multiple releases, the soundtrack album.
Journey is on Steam currently for $14.99.
Yeah, I'm looking on VGMDB. It might be that the Sony Classical release of the soundtrack is a more recent one, because there's been previous releases under other publishers, including one where Austin Wintory released it independently through Bandcamp. So it's possible Sony didn't have that much faith at the time, but when YouTube Music came around, they re-released it through Sony Classical for digital.
You know what other composer has the soundtrack of the game we're going to talk about on Bandcamp? Matthew Steele from the Dungeons of Dredmor soundtrack.
Nice transition.
Thank you.
This has strong SNES vibes.
Oh, really? That's the.
This was the one I thought sounded kind of Castlevania-esque, actually.
Yeah, I thought like
because I'm getting neither.
Yeah, I thought like Super Castlevania 4-ish vibes.
Yeah.
I'm not really getting that, funnily enough, but maybe that's because I'm influenced by the type of game, which is extremely anchored in PC gaming culture. In a way, Dungeons of Dredmor is kind of the inverse of VVVVV. Which is funny given the gameplay of VVVVV is to invert things already. But while the first game we talked about is all about making callbacks, this one is very much trying to modernize a genre that was very anchored in just ASCII look, which is a roguelike dungeon crawler. Like, when the debate for what is a roguelike and what is a roguelite was raging, Dredmor was basically the end point of what roguelike is. But it's got the staples like the grid-based movement and the weird, wacky tons and tons of equipment, except it also has a visual interface that is made for humans and not aliens.
That's a nice improvement.
Indeed. And it also has a soundtrack, including this song, which triggers when you encounter another staple of the roguelike genre, which is monster zoos. Basically, you go through a door, normally there's a room with like 2 or 3 enemies, and you walk on and continue with your life. A monster zoo is an innocuous door, and on the other side, the entire 8x10 room is literally filled with monsters. Now deal with it. Especially if you
So a
want
treasure
to
room, Palace of the Dead.
Kinda, yeah. Except if you had doors that were blocking the view, and you didn't know what you were walking into.
Fun.
So that explains the tone of that track that's both agitated and kind of... I mean, there's an energy to it, but also the feeling that things can be about to go extremely wrong extremely fast.
Yep.
Like somebody says
Weirdly
in the
enough,
comments, 62% of the time, this is the last song you'll hear.
I can believe it.
Yeah, weirdly enough, now all of a sudden I'm seeing in my mind the scene from Star Wars A New Hope, where Han is chasing a couple stormtroopers, rounds a corner. Now all of a sudden he's face to face with a battalion. He arbitrarily shoots one as a panic and then turns and bails.
Yeah, that's kind of the feel of it. Except that those skills can be very different depending on how you build your characters with interesting skill trees.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, as far as I can tell for the composer, basically he has a Bandcamp with this game soundtrack, the game expansion soundtrack, Conquest of the Wizardlands, another game I've never heard of. Excuse me, for emphasis, another game I never heard of.
That's a first.
And then nothing else. He's just a guy. He made music for a game and then he pissed out 8 years ago.
That's a bit of a shame, but you know,
Indeed.
Everyone's got their own lives.
Yeah, exactly. And might as well go on a note that leaves lasting memory, because that track, for all its sense of impending doom, was one that stuck with me because it's got a good rhythm. It's fun. It fits the game's look of kind of wackiness, but also with that old school sensibility.
So this conversation reminds me that I think I missed an opportunity here.
Did you know?
Because one of a game that I only just remembered now, I might add, but a soundtrack I actually did buy from Bandcamp and still listen to, was from one-time composer and now big-time streamer and occasional voice actor, Elspeth Eastman.
For the game?
I think it was like I Saw Her There 3 or something. It was a sequel to like a weird like minimalistic Flash game, and she did like this piano soundtrack to it. And I popped into her stream once or twice and been like, hey, you still compose or anything? But never got a response because she's a big-time streamer with, like, thousands of fans at a time. I just remembered this thing. I have it on my playlist on my other computer, and I need to check on that. But, yeah, that would have been a good one to add to this franchise, huh? Because I'm the subject of people who composed briefly and pieced it.
And that feels kind of like the intersection of indie games and indie music. And where some things led up to spanning franchises and others to kind of just one-hit wonder. And yeah, I think this intersection is interesting and goes along with the other thing we've remarked, which is that the book wasn't really written at the time. There was no right or wrong way to make music for your indie game.
Oh, that's a lie. There's definitely a wrong way, and I'll tell you exactly what that wrong way is, because there's another game I played briefly that literally just stole music from The Last Remnant.
Okay, that's a wrong way.
That's a wrong way. I actually did email Square, and I'm like, hey, you may want to bring the hammer on these guys.
That's a fair reason to get in contact.
Which I feel I feel a bit like a narc, but at the same time, like, don't steal music, guys.
Don't steal
for
art
commercial
in general.
project, absolutely. If it's something like, I know there's in RPG Maker communities a bit of a clash between composed music and just reusing tracks from other games, depending on the size of the project. Basically, the more your project scales up, the more using music that isn't from your game, from home composed sort of, is looked down on, which kind of checks out. Although I think the real marking point would be commercialization.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't have a problem with using prior music for things that are released for free, or, you know, things that are just for fun, or a one-person development team. Like, sure, go ahead, have fun with that.
Yeah, but if you're going to
talked
sell
earlier
things,
about
even for $2 on your game that rips off Castlevania Sprite, at least ask a guy to compose music that are kind of from the series but with the numbers filed off. Oh wait, that's not an early indie, that's Vampire Survivors, and it came out last year.
Yeah,
like
that sounds like
strong.
a very recent story.
That sounds familiar. Wonder where I've heard it before.
And that's kind of my point, is that these established a lot of codes that are still very much active and relevant today.
Yeah, I think even Vampire Survivors is a good example of how even if your game's main identity, or let's say your art project's main identity, is just this is a very obvious homage to this very specific thing, you still kind of have the onus on you to bring new stuff to people who enjoy your content. You're just stealing from the original. What are you doing selling that? That's not yours.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think a lot of games succeeded in doing that transition and bringing new fresh ideas that large, multiple hundreds of people strong studios couldn't.
Yeah. Like, AAA games are very, very, very stuck in their ways right now. And they have a formula that kind of works and are making money off of, but it ends up looking very homogenous, and that level of creativity just isn't there.
If you like the kind of things that are AAA games, great, you have lots of choice. But I'm glad there is a very diverse set of games for people that kind of fell off that train early on, in my case, obviously, but had many creative entries to fall back on.
I can't remember the last... Oh, I can't actually remember the last time I enjoyed a full-on AAA game. Now that I think about it, I'm like, oh, right, there was Rise of the Tomb Raider. But yeah, mostly I stick to, at most, the AA sphere. I think the most... FF14 is... Yeah, FF14 is kind of in that borderline. Hitman is kind of in that borderline. But yeah, the top of the top, I don't I don't usually play those sorts of franchises.
Yeah. Now then, shall we move on?
Let's talk about what we do play, I guess.
Yeah. With Music Arcade.
Music Arcade, now playing.
2 intros, I feel left out.
In stereo, even.
Yeah.
I got nothing. I'm back playing old stuff that either doesn't have music on YouTube or we've already talked about at length. Arknights had an event rerun, really great music there. Nothing new, I've talked about it already. I'm back to playing Rogue Genesia again, because that just came out with its 0.8 update. That's a fun Vampire Survivors clone, on the subject of Vampire Survivors. Music's not on YouTube. Playing FF14. I'm not talking about the Man of Real music, because there isn't any, really. I mean, there is, but it's the same stuff we've already heard. Yeah, I got nothing. Next.
I got nothing, because I've finished Like a Dragon Ishin, and that does mean that I've looked into a few other games to fill the gap for the rest of the month, and there has been some interesting picks as far as the games go, with things like Sunhaven and Terraformers, but none which had a really a soundtrack that kind of felt relevant to discuss, except one notable example that Edie also picked. That's right, I started playing Destiny. Oh wait, I'm lying. Anyway, Edie, it's your turn.
It amuses me that I spent about a week sick, and yet I'm the one with actual picks for this section.
It's like being sick gives you an excuse to go be an absolute couch potato and
I was actually
go full video game gremlin mode.
I was actually working while sick, so not that kind of sick.
That's even better. Anyway, talk about video games.
Yeah,
because we sure as hell won't.
Oh, good boy. So yeah, Destiny 2 still on my docket, because it's a live service game, and we all know what live service games do to their player base. Just a quick overview, since we got a new expansion. I'd say expansion on a whole, mixed bag. Story's kind of bad, but there's enough YouTube videos about the story if you want to really see why it's bad. Gameplay, really, really fun. Bungie needs to do a tuning pass on the difficulty, but that aside, really, really fun gameplay. And the soundtrack is very cool. So they released sort of a mini documentary prior to releasing the expansion, where they were showing some insights from the composers. And one of the objectives that they stated was not only the composer's objective, but also Bungie's objective with the campaign for this expansion, was to make you feel like you were in your own action movie. And I'd say they landed that perfectly.
Okay.
So we have a song on the playlist called Battle Ready, and I think it plays twice in the campaign, but the first time it plays, it's very much what I feel a homage to 80s movies, because you have a section where you're trying to control a new power, but you're unable to. You always lose it at critical moments, and you're depowered for a minute or so. But then you get a mission where you are training, in virtual training, how to control that power. And you feel like the most powerful action hero of all time while doing that, because you get a buff where all your ability cooldowns are very low. And then this song plays in the background while you were just mowing enemies down. And it's very satisfying.
Yeah, and it took me by surprise, because I had the picture for Destiny soundtrack, and including the latest expansion, to have this very electronic feel to it, and this kind of takes the counterpoint and makes it work, judging by what you're saying.
Yeah, they have a lot of electric guitars and brass on this expansion. It's a really cool sound.
Yeah, but it's not a bleep and bloop kind of song.
No. I would say, like, this soundtrack probably doesn't have anything as iconic to Destiny fans as Journey, which was one of the standout tracks from Vanilla Destiny, or Deepstone Lullaby, which was a standout track from the Beyond Light expansion. But on a whole, when you take the soundtrack album in its entirety, I would say this might be the closest in overall quality that Bungie has gotten since their days as the Halo developers. Which is worth pointing out that one of the main Halo composers is still working at Bungie, and he still works. He works on Destiny. He's called Michael Salvatore.
Nice.
He worked on Halo 1 through to Halo 3 ODST, and he then started working on Destiny and has been there ever since, doing some good work. And
hell yeah.
As for the other game I've been playing, which is the one Rana was foreshadowing, Dead Cells got a Castlevania. I guess you weren't then, but Dead Cells got a Castlevania crossover. Speaking of indie games going big.
Yeah,
and all the subject of games that I need to play.
Konami at a trade show hoping for something small, and one thing led to another, and full Castlevania DLC.
Yeah, an interview came out where they said they just wanted a deal with Konami for publishing rights in Japan, because publishing across continents is a whole mess if you're independent. And then turned out Konami was very enthusiastic, and they just turned it the partnership into a full DLC, and it's a fun DLC.
What a DLC that is, yeah.
Yeah, and they pay homage to a lot of characters and songs from Castlevania.
I mean, you're underselling it. There is, I believe, 13 songs that have been remade by the Dead Cells composer, plus an option you can toggle in the audio game menu the moment you have the DLC to change the entire soundtrack to Castlevania songs from what I've heard. It ranges starting at Super Castlevania 4 and ending at Order of Ecclesia, and there's pretty much everything in between. With, of course, a lot of Symphony of the Night.
I haven't tried that option yet. I kind of need to now.
Yeah, because they didn't advertise it.
That sounds amazing. But yeah, I've only played like the
Rector Shrine has an empty tome on it. It's great.
Good lord.
Yeah.
But yeah, I only listened to the songs that actually play in the Castlevania areas of the map. So bit of a limited exposure, let's say. But those are really fun arrangements, I'd say. They, on a vacuum, might not necessarily be my favorite arrangements of Castlevania songs, but they've done it in a way that fits the aesthetic of Dead Cells and the pre-existing soundtrack, so it doesn't feel out of place.
And there's some very kind of natural sounding guitars that are involved.
Yeah, it's some really cool stuff. Thumbs up to this DLC. I've seen other crossovers between indie games and big name franchises before that were very middling. This one was executed really, really well. You can feel the passion.
Also, funnily enough, last episode, I believe you put as one of your picks for now playing the first song you hear on the prison level.
Yes, as I was...
Well, that's replaced by Dracula's Castle, which is pretty good as far as first level songs go.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. If you toggle the options for the alternative soundtrack, there's also an option to make it an 8-bit soundtrack.
Huh. Why didn't they advertise that?
I don't know. I guess that they had it in there already, and they just kind of had the options for granted. So they said there is a total of 60 tracks, 30 originals and 43 new ones, but old ones. But we won't tell you where to find them. But they're in the options menu. But we won't say that.
Well, I need to
It's
do
weird,
it.
but at least I'm glad the soundtrack is there, and I guess the composer does have to justify his pay given the very flat structure of the company.
And now I feel like I need to play the game once more. So, see you guys later.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to do the same and rage quit after the second attempt, where I'm this close to finally get to a full health Dracula fight, but then I take one cursed chest and get one shot because I'm greedy and stupid.
And I'm going to get some more coffee because I have yet to play this video game.
Well, I think that's as good a point as any to end the episode.
I dare say it is. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm sorry if I wasn't as animated as usual today. I'm very, very tired.
That's
Insomnia
why
is awful.
we have more than one host.
Absolutely. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. As always, you can find us at music.arcade.podcast@gmail.com or in other links, including the Discord, in the description below. Have a good one, everybody. I need sleep.
See ya? I don't.
Die, Dracula, die!